In part two of this marathon interview with Douglas Burden, we dive straight into the controversial issue of pay for musicians and negotiation, and ensemble work, specifically reflecting on 17 seasons with his brass dectet, Capitol Brass Works. It's a fascinating deep dive into the industry. I hope you enjoy it as much as I did. Don't forget to hit subscribe now to support further interviews with top-line, fascinating trombone players across the world. See you in part 3 next week. Tricky issue, pricing and pay. I mean, as a musician, I think it's fair to say we're amongst the most underpaid professions in the world when you consider how hard we studied, under what competitive aspects. Is there anything you'd like to say about that? Any tips, especially maybe for the younger musicians in negotiating, and is it a mindset thing? What do we need to do to improve this?
That is a very, very multi-layered and in-depth question. Thanks for asking it. I can only answer it from my own personal perspective. What I have to say here probably, I know, wouldn't apply to the freelance world in London, England, or even the orchestral world in London, England, which is actually freelance, as we know. In continental Europe, in Germany, in Italy, I think each situation is very, very different. For me, being associated with a National Arts Centre orchestra and having a contract with that orchestra, which is a collective bargaining agreement facilitated and negotiated through the Musicians Association, I have benefited from the long length of the evolution of that contract. And I have benefited from it financially. I have benefited from it in terms of security, in terms of actual medical benefits. So I consider myself extremely fortunate and extremely blessed. And as such, I really don't think that I can offer valuable insight and advice to someone who is a complete freelancer in an environment where you are on your own or your group is on your own. I am personally a strong believer in music unions or music associations so that employers or impresarios will not take advantage of the performer. And if they are taken advantage of, then the performer has some arbitration or some channel through which they can address those oversights. So that's what I would suggest. The other thing is, I know it's a very, very competitive world. Try not to undercut your competition, because when you undercut your competition, you're undercutting yourself in the end. You really are. It's dog eat dog, and if the fee goes down because everyone is willing to do the same thing for less and less and less money, you have to know that there's value to the work you have and the education and experience which has led up to that particular performance. It has value. Most of people in today's society don't understand that intellectual or artistic value. It's difficult for them to understand that there is a monetary value that needs to be placed on it. I do not envy anyone going into the freelance world as it is right now.
That's some beautiful points, though, especially it shouldn't be a race to the bottom.
Yes.
It should be a race to the top.
Yeah.
And that's so hard for the beginner, because indeed he might say, I need the work, so I'll take it for less. But as you said, you're reducing the market long term. I like to think of it as I'm negotiating for my colleagues. That actually helps me when I'm on the phone or have to do those negotiations. And what you said about the union is very interesting. Obviously, every country will have a different kind of union. In Germany, it's not particularly strong. There's Verdi. actually, I won't say anything about Verdi. They do what they can for that scene. But there are, since Corona, there have been some new freelance type unions which seem to be doing very interesting work. And I'm seeing, for example, Deutsche Orchestervereinigung, DOV. They created, there's several of them, but they created perhaps the most well-known, let's say, table of honorare, meaning fees for the freelancer. Now, there's a lot of colleagues. I spoke yesterday to a colleague around 60. She said she'd never heard of this. I said, this has been helping me when I have to go for bursaries, etc. I just quote this fairly well-known association in Germany and say, this is their minimum. And then I leave it up to that city council or whoever to then make a decision. Well, are we going to pay in line with that, or are we going to say we can't? And interestingly, more often than not, actually, people have been prepared to pay that. But it strengthens as you said, the individual to say, hey, it's not just me saying, oh, $200 for a concert or $500. It's we actually have thought about this as a crowd of musicians, and we think it should be minimum this and ideally this.
Mm-hmm. One footnote that I can add, from my perspective, I'm now 70 years of age. So when I started playing at NACO, I was 20 years of age. Again, being blessed with the situation that I was able to join and become a member of, there were contributions towards the musician's pension plan, and those accumulated up through 50 years. And so now at age 70, I'm able to move on to a retirement season in my life. And part of the income that I receive on a monthly basis, and a substantial portion, comes from the Musicians' Pension Fund of Canada. Fortunately, the Canadian Pension Fund is on a much better financial footing than our colleagues with the American Federation. They were managed very, very differently. If you, as an individual freelancer, wish to have a lifelong career, I urge you on your own to begin putting money aside as soon as possible, even though it might be sacrificial savings. 10% of your gross put aside for your pension. Because if you don't do it, no one else is going to do it. And the government, depending what country you're in and the philosophy of the government, you could end up on the breadline when it comes to contemplating retirement. So you have to invest in your own future in the same way that when you're a freelancer, 10% to your pension, 10% to reinvesting in purchasing those recordings, purchasing the access to the streaming, purchasing printed solos, printed excerpt books, investing back in the industry that you are hoping that will provide a living to you. And at the same time, you're investing in your own growth as a performer and as an artist.
Pay it forward, we call that, don't we?
Absolutely.
I haven't seen the movie. So in terms of, beautiful comments. Thanks, Doug. In terms of ensemble work, I've got at least 3-4 questions about the ensemble. As I know, many years Capital Brassworks, your dectet. I'm sure you'd like to say some details about them. How long were you together? And first, again, this longevity. I mean, anybody can form a brass ensemble, but not many keep it together for as long as you did. Secrets? Well,
we performed for about 17 seasons, which is a very, very long time. When it comes to any chamber ensemble, whether it be a string quartet, a piano trio, and the more numbers you add, the more volatile the situation could be. Our reason for forming a group were various, and it probably changed with every person that you spoke to. But we basically wanted to play without a conductor in front of us. initially that was what our intention was. It's a lot easier when you're a quartet or a quintet to play without a conductor, and many of us had done that and continued to still play in quintets. But we wanted to embrace the Philip Jones Brass Ensemble dectet repertoire, which we expanded upon and occasionally went to the full symphonic brass size group. And it was brass and percussion.
At
But
what point do
only
you call it symphonic? Simply with percussion, or?
no. Symphonic as to going from two horns to four horns. And maybe adding, there might be two tuba parts and maybe a euphonium part. As with probably the largest example of the size of the group was when Paul Archibald, who is a British trumpet player, did an incredible transcription of the main movements from the Prokofiev Romeo and Juliet for large brass and percussion ensemble. So that's probably when we were the largest. We also did the William Walton Spitfire Prelude and Fugue, and I can't remember who the transcriber and arranger of that. But we paid for the rental of that and put that on the concert, and the same concert as we did the Erica Wazen Symphony in brass. So that's when we expanded. But most of our concerts tended to be the dectet repertoire or similar repertoire that we commissioned from other composers, or we had two wonderful arrangers within our group, Colin Troquer, trombonist, and Angus Armstrong, also a trombonist. Provided us with wonderful arrangements to fill out the thematically based concerts that we produced. So anyways, yes, how do you have a successful brass ensemble without a conductor? It took a while for us to evolve a very successful formula, because what we wanted to, by eliminating the conductor, we wanted to individually have more say in what should be performed and how it should be formed. And the thing is that all of our opinions are valid, and in a true Canadian way, we valued each one evenly. You might agree with someone or not agree with someone. So there were some rehearsals in the earliest days which we did a lot of playing, but we didn't necessarily improve that much. Even though playing together just by itself helps to make the playing improve. We also did have conductors at various stages in the group. Don't get me wrong. Tom Anand was a Ottawa-based organist and conductor that conducted many of our early concerts just to make sure that we got things done. Then we moved away from a conductor. For our recordings, we always had a conductor because recording time and product is so essential. But these were individuals, it was always Alain Caz. Tom Annan did our first recording, and Alain Caz did the second, third, and the fourth recordings with us. And he is a tuba player from Montreal, but also conducts the wind ensemble at the Schulich School of Music associated with McGill University. Wonderful guy, wonderful conductor, thoroughly prepared to look at his scores. Everything was completely anticipated, and he knew exactly what he wanted and was able to just get the most from us. So it was a wonderful experience.
I just dig a bit deeper into that one point you made about, let's say, the hierarchy of decision making, because I find that fascinating in any ensemble. Where does the buck drop, or where does it lie when the group is divided with a musical opinion?
Very, very excellent question. And what we eventually and rather quickly came to a process. And that process became, first of all, we would gather as a group at least once a year. And I was able to tell them, because of the grant applications and what we got from the City of Ottawa, the Province of Ontario, the Government of Canada, how many concerts we could self-produce for a 10-piece group, a large ensemble, and whatever. And so we often had, we purposely chose themes. There was a Spanish night, an Italian music night, English music night, jazz night. And so we would, taking that as the central focus, then we say, okay, what pieces do we know? Okay, this piece worked, this piece worked. And we would end up with a concert with 60 minutes of music, which might be, let's say, six pieces. So then, this is where we really took off in a very successful way. We would say, Nick, you will guide the rehearsals of this piece. Don Renshaw, you will guide the rehearsals of that. Karen, you will guide them, and so on and so forth. And the aim was for that individual, during the initial rehearsals, to take the information, which was still encouraged, and we wanted people to provide, this should be faster, this should be slower, this should be louder, this should be softer, we should be doing this. And the coordinator would take all this information in, and then with about 3 rehearsals left, or maybe 2 rehearsals left, say, thank you for your contributions, but after we have worked things out, this is the tempo, this is where we'll speed up, this is where we'll slow down, this is who will give the cutoff cue, this is the instrumentalist who will give the downbeat. So rather than having this mishmash of input, that had already taken place, been processed, been condensed, and okay. And that's when we really took off, and it was neat. It was neat.
That is such a Canadian solution. So democratic in theory.
Well, and yes, and thank you for saying that. But also because I think all of us in the group were Canadians. We valued each other's input and respected each other, and really became just one big family. Pete Sullivan made that reference, and Pete is a Canadian from Timmins, Ontario, working now in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. Our principal trombonist, whose name is Don Renshaw, passed away in December after a short battle against cancer. And Don said, Doug, your brass section is just like one big family, and that is very rare in orchestras. I'm sure that there are some other orchestras that are like that, but we've been blessed to have this uniformity of concept, a supporting aspect, and respect for each other, which is on stage with NACO, but was also part of Capella Brassworks. And I would say that was the reason the group lasted as long as it did. And the self-produced concerts that we had, which were usually 3 concerts a year, one was always a Christmas concert. So then we would have these other theme concerts sometime in the fall, and then sometime in the spring for the other concert. But also the reputation of the group was such that we were invited to different festivals outside of Ottawa, or community concert series, so that we would take what we had just finished as a performed concert and a self-produced concert in Ottawa, and do it in Brockville or do it in Pembroke. We were invited to perform at the Elora Festival, other festivals. There's one down, again, the senior moment. It's in a big barn. So word travels fast when you have success. And you don't always have to reinvent the wheel. Just take that wheel and make it better, but do it over there.
Again, two beautiful things there. The one is, some people say put the music first. I'm almost hearing from you, you put the people first. Now that I find that fascinating. I mean, when push comes to shove, the people are more important than the music, at least to keep the thing together. We can argue about that. But I love that humane aspect that you just mentioned, because if you don't look after that, then it's not going to have a great atmosphere.
No. And keeping any chamber ensemble together for a long time takes people wanting it to work, because we're all strong personalities, and you need people with strong personalities. Don't get me wrong, but the personalities are different, and that personality may rub someone else's personality the wrong way. But you have to learn how to, So yes, we are fortunate that we had people that knew when to close their lips and just suck it up and take whatever criticism, which was always spoken with very, you're too loud, you're rushing, you're dragging. It was often never done in a negative form, but it was expressed more, we're getting behind here. I think we just need to keep, or the leading line isn't being heard. Let's listen for balance. There's a tendency for some intonation problems at this point. And again, that's where the coordinator would identify those in, first of all, musical terms. And we're all with it enough to know, well, that person's talking to me. I better do something different, rather than, burden, you're too loud, or tuba, you're driving the tempo too much. The trumpets can't keep up, or trumpets, you're playing sharp.
That's fascinating. Again, we're talking about a high-level musicianship, but equally high-level diplomacy.
Oh, absolutely.
Here, these skills, again, that just aren't talked about so much in your musical studies. I wonder if that works. The smaller the group gets, if you can always go with that, we are rushing, or if the group gets smaller, is there no way of getting around sort of pointing towards individuals, or do you think that's a philosophy you should keep regardless of size?
That's a very good question. In my opinion, size has nothing to do with it. It's the personality of the individual. All right? Because I've played in many, many, many brass quintets. There was one brass quintet that I played in, and I'm not going to mention where it was based or who the players were, but there was one horn player who felt that he was given a God-given metronome, and while we were playing, in his in the bell with his right hand, we heard, when you have that kind of personality, that group didn't last long.
So you don't think that's acceptable rehearsal practice?
That is not good rehearsal technique. One of the neatest techniques, which I do often when I'm coaching student brass quintets or student chamber ensembles, and I forget where I read it, but it's wonderful, because chamber ensembles essentially is about listening. It's all about what you hear. You have to know the full score as an individual, but you have to listen to the whole group and know how your part fits in. So, for example, the usual brass quintet horseshoe like that, all faces inwards. I would say to the students that I'm coaching, keep the same horseshoe, but turn your chairs 180 degrees, so you're playing away from. So there's no eye contact, there's no visual cues with trombones bumping up or trumpets going like that. It's your eyes. It's all about your ears and listening. And yes, it sounds terrible, right, from the get-go. But then they begin to rely upon their ears. And begin to understand what the other person's part is, because you have to know everyone else's part incredibly well, because there's no conductor. That's the whole essence of, in my opinion, of chamber music. So after having done that for a while, then go back. So then the primary thing is listening, but then you get the visual clues. And with wind and brass ensembles, just the inhaling and exhaling, that is a huge cue in itself for your neighbors. And you aren't breathing loudly, but you're aware that the person is inhaling. So that's a huge cue. That's like,
it's a beautiful technique. I had that once in London from a coach too, but I'd forgotten it. Thanks for that. Definitely have to work with that again. My last question in this ensemble section, you could say, is just we just touched on it, but social dynamics. We've just agreed they're very important. You said you'd meet once a year. How would you specifically also have social occasions, perhaps not related to music, or where you said, no, this is primarily now to meet as people rather than to make music?
Another very thoughtful question. We would have the annual general meeting, for lack of a better term. That's official, where we would go over the finances. This is how much we made, this is how much we spent, and let's plan the next season. So that was done, something which I always organized. Usually it took place an hour prior to a rehearsal, but it was an hour set aside with an agenda, and I prepared all the documentation, sent it out ahead of time, so it was efficient, and it was very, very good. The social events usually were going to a pub after every performance, certainly every performance wherever we were, to blow off steam, to blow off pressure, and our small but adoring audience knew where we were going, and they would flock to it. And it was such a wonderful, wonderful, wonderful experience. I can't say that we did that after rehearsals, because we were all very busy professionals and teachers, husbands, wives, parents, property owners, homeowners. Life has to go on. But after performances, yeah, we would have a few cold ones, something to eat, because there's nothing like the energy that is expended mentally and physically when you play a full brass ensemble concert. And yeah, so those social times were very, very special.
That's interesting, that seizing the moment, at least if it's after the performance. I'm a big fan of that too, and I find it a shame how some people they don't prioritize that, or maybe they're not able to, simply because that other half of their life, as you just mentioned, is then impeding, so they need to get home to see to kids, or just to prepare for the next early start. It's a shame that the pressure of the job gets in the way, but I still think we shouldn't lose sight of those important social dynamics, as you said, letting off steam, etc. And interesting there as well, as you mentioned, the audience coming along too. Perhaps that could be a bigger part actually of the ensemble, that I'm not sure if you would, I imagine you wouldn't say it in the concert itself, but yeah, I just did that at New Year's actually. New Year's Day is my birthday, and we played into New Year, and I made the mistake of saying, hey, my parents have some drinks outside. There came an onrush of thirsty people, but it was great. But I like that idea of trying community building alongside the music.
Well, as you were talking, my mind was going back into my memory banks, and there were actual concerts that we produced, usually that would take place in a church sanctuary, and members of the wives or the significant others from the groups, or some other people, would volunteer to put on a reception in the basement of the church to which we would then invite the audience, and we would go down and mingle, and it was great. It was really great. The concert where I mentioned we performed the Walton Spitfire Prelude and Fugue
I was
paired
there.
with the Wazen. We got a buy-in from a local organization called Vintage Wings of Canada. Michael Potter is a millionaire, a multimillionaire, who made his millions in the high-tech industry in Ottawa. But he was also a private pilot who had tons of money and, somewhat like myself, just loved the aviation history of the Second World War, and was able to explore that to the point where he owned his own Spitfire, his own Hurricane, and numerous other aircraft which were in flying condition that he flew. And they put on a display in the church hall basement after the concert where we did the Spitfire Prelude and Fugue. So we tapped into the community, and they tapped into us, and it was nice.
Funnily enough, I was at that evening in Ottawa.
Oh, is that right?
Yeah, I was. Yeah, the Spitfire. Yeah. I couldn't remember how big the statue was, or the model was, but I vividly remember that happening. Yeah.
Yeah.
But yeah, absolutely. The audience wants to hear the music, but they want to get to know the characters, right?
Absolutely. Because what we learned, we were optimistic that we could grow our audience. And no matter what we did programming wise or excellence improvement, there still is, unfortunately, a perception of brass chamber music, which you have avid enthusiasts who will come to every single concert. But you will have some other people who will go to concerts all through the year that just won't take that leap of faith to come to a brass concert because they have preconceived ideas as to what it's going to sound like. So we were never able to increase our audience. And that's why I have to tip my hat at a group like the Canadian Brass, who their formula for years and years has their branding, their programming, their presentation, everything about them carefully thought out. People flock to Canadian Brass concerts. One of the things, just circling back to the social aspect, if there's nothing more that we can learn from the pandemic, I think we have realized as individuals that we are social people. Certainly in Canada and Ottawa, the province of Ontario, the lockdown measures that were put in place for medical reasons, and I fully supported them, helped to reduce the spread of the COVID virus, but it forced us to be living at home in silos, and our spirits shrunk. Individually we shrunk. Our thoughts about ourselves and our neighbors changed because we didn't have the social interaction. So that's what I love about music and ensemble playing rather than soloing. And I love soloing, but I wouldn't want to make a whole career of soloing. So the social aspect, yes, attending concerts, attending live concerts, and if you can mingle with the artists afterwards, then it's added bonus. It's a fourth dimension to the experience.